In this lesson, we'll take a look at the poly bridge node while we continue to build out the wheel assembly for our car. So we're going to pick up right from where we left off at the last lesson, and we have our tube positioned centered right here with our inner brake drum. And all we need to do first off is to make sure that we have matched up the number of divisions in our tube with the number of divisions in our brakes. Now we just want to make sure, let me zoom in here. We just want to make sure that we have the same number of these, the same resolution basically for the circle here that we have inside of our tire. Now, there's one easy way to do this, and it's using the same technique that we did before using references. If we look at the circle, we put 16 divisions around our circle. That's what defines this number right here, the number of these edges that we're working with, okay? And that carries through the entire piece of geometry. And since these two pieces of geometry are eventually going to be connected, as we see here, we want to make sure that they're the same. So let's just use that same method we did with expressions to get the same number of divisions down in our tube. I'm just going to right-click on the divisions, copy that parameter, come down to the tube, and the thing that drives that number of divisions in a tube is called columns. And basically it's just referring to how many of these columns make up the roundness of the tube. So we see here we can make that really, really dense, or we can make it really, really jagged, where it's actually just a triangle when we're done. So this is where we want to put in the information that we grabbed from the circle. We'll make sure that the word columns is highlighted in light gray. We'll right-click on it, and again, the option we want is Paste Copied Relative References. You'll see that the number of divisions in the viewport changes, that our tube is actually now has the same number of divisions as one node up in this network here. Remember, that's what the dot dot refers to as outside, one step for the tube. Then we go to circle 1, and we look for the divs property. So circle 1, and sure enough, divisions, if we hover over it, we can see that the parameter is actually referenced as divs, D-I-V-S, and you can see that right there. So we don't have to know that channel expression. We don't have to remember that it's CH bracket quote dot dot black. All we do is copy and paste it. But it's very important that we understand what it is that we're looking at when we see that expression, because later we're going to actually use some more complicated expressions. So it's good to get used to this kind of syntax and understand what it is. But for right now, it's just a copy and paste procedure. So we've got the same number of divisions now in our what's going to be our wheel and tire, and we've also got the position lined up and centered using these expressions. The next step is to position this tube so that it's in a little bit better place in reference to the car. And to do that, I'm going to change my ghosting mode, which we discussed in a previous lesson here. Using this fourth icon over, I'm going to do Ghost Other Objects. That'll allow me to see the car and this tube at the same time. So we're going to want to change this looking at it through two different views. So first, I'm going to look through the front viewport. Now, looking through the front viewport, I can see that this tire is very, very wide. Like, it's way too wide for what we want. So I want to kind of make that a little shorter. And the way that we do that is on the tube, we use the property of height. So we make the height of the tube a little bit shorter, to where it's going to be about the width of what we want our tire to be. And this is just a random guess. I'm just kind of eyeballing what I want this to be right now. And I've already locked down the position of the tube using this channel reference earlier that we just talked about with this expression. But you have the ability to actually do mathematical operations inside of channels in Houdini. So I've got this little script that says, yeah, I want to pull the value of the channel from circle, and its translation in X is where I want that to be. Now I can look here and see by this little indicator in the bottom left-hand corner of my viewport that it is X, that I want to push this to the right in X. Well, X is locked down now to this, but I can always add to it. Very simply, all I did was click inside that particular channel, and I'm going to type in space plus space, and let's just try 0.05 for right now, something to try. And as soon as I do, you'll see that it shifted it over 0.05 units in addition to what it was pulling from the original expression. And we can see that here if we take this off, and I'm just going to highlight it and delete it, and now hit enter on the keyboard. You see the wheel jumps back. We'll look at the value. Again, the way to read the value that's actually being pulled here is to left click on that name. So we'll left click on it. You'll see that it's 0.569425. Click on it again. We go back to the expression, and I'm going to retype in plus 0.05. Now if I click on center, you'll see that value has actually changed and increased by 0.05. Well, now that we have this little modifier here on the end, Houdini will actually let us use our value ladder to make that adjustment. So the initial center of the tube is driven by the position of this circle, which references our brake drum assembly, right? But now we can modify it. So we're just sort of nudging it a little bit past what its center is. So I'm going to hover my mouse right over the 0.05 area and middle click. Sure enough, when I do, I get my value ladder, and I can come down here and use that value ladder to adjust that position. So I'm just going to set it, I don't know, probably somewhere about right here. It's a little bit outside of that fender well, but I think for now, again, just for kind of eyeballing it, that's going to work. I can tell that the tire is also way too tall. We need to be able to fix that. So let's fix that by looking through the right viewport. Now with the right viewport selected, I want to look at my tube here. So there I can see that the height of the tube is way too big for the fender well. What we want to do is kind of try to line it up with this ghosted inside line here. This is the inside of the hub of the fender from the car. To do that, we can use the radius scale option, and we'll just bring that in a little bit. So we're just scaling the radius of the circle down. And I don't necessarily have to worry about fitting it in the height because I'm probably going to have to move this entire assembly down just a little bit. And we can do that later. It'll be easy enough to do in a later step. For right now, I want to worry about the width. So let's go ahead and take the radius scale up a bit. And really what I'm looking for is just about the limit of where the edge here comes in contact with that inner fender well line. So right in there somewhere. So that looks about right. Let's go ahead and look at this in perspective view. So I'm going to do spacebar and 1. That will shift me over to perspective view. Looks about right. I think the tire might still be a little bit too wide. So I'm going to take its height down. So the height scale here, we're going to bring it down. That looks a lot better. Yeah, it looks about right. And the other thing that I want to change is I think I'm going to have to push the tube itself, a little bit further out. Or I may actually just want to bring the brake drum in a little bit too. So let's grab the brake drum and scoot the brake drum into the car a little bit, and then we'll scoot this tube out a little bit. So first off, everything about the brake drum is driven by the position of the circle. So simply enough, I can grab the circle and change its position, and it should bring everything about the brake drum with it. So I want to move it back in X, so I'm just going to use my value ladder here over X. Again, hover over the property you want to change and just middle click. We'll scoot it back a little bit. Excellent. Sort of tucking it back in a little bit. Okay. Okay, that's about right in there somewhere. For me, that value is going to be 415.425. But really what I'm trying to do is make sure that it is tucked away inside of the body of the vehicle. Now, you should have noticed that when I was moving that the tire went along with it. Now, that's what's super cool about using channel references and expressions to line things up the way that we did. All I had to do was move that circle, that base circle, and everything else went along with it. And that's simply because the position of that circle is being used to drive the position of the tube and then everything else below it. So there we go. We've got our brake drum sort of tucked into the car. Let's scoot our wheel back out a little bit more. Now remember, we can do that adjustment here very simply. Click on the tube. We want to adjust it, so we're going to hover over that value here inside of our expression. Middle click. come down and we'll scoot that out just a little bit. Kind of tumble around and look. Yeah, that looks like that's about right. Might be a little bit wide. I see it poking through the geometry here. So I can, again, just lower my height a little bit here. There we go. Starting to look pretty solid. I think that's probably going to work for us. Excellent. All right, so the next thing we need to do is put some end caps on our tube. And that's very simply just one check mark. If we scroll up a little bit in the parameters of the tube, we'll see this button for end caps. We'll add the end caps. And now we're going to use our poly extrude tool that we're used to using from before. Now to see a little bit easier what's happening in the viewport here, I'm going to change my ghosting mode to hide other objects. So I'm just looking at that tire now. And so I'll move my display flag over to the tube. I'm going to select primitives. Remember, primitives are what Houdini calls faces. There's same things referred to as faces sometimes in other applications. So we're going to make sure that we have those selected. I'm going to hold down Shift. That's going to let me add to my selection. So I've got both of those faces. And now it's time just to make some simple poly extrudes as we have in the past. So with my mouse hovering over the geometry here inside of the scene view, I'm going to hit Tab. I'll grab the poly extrude node. Houdini automatically places it right here in the network view where it needs to be. I'm given my handles that I need to start making adjustments. Now, what I'm going to do is first, let's take a quick look at our reference. I want to define this width of the tire first. So that first extrusion is going to be basically scaling that interface in. So we want to transform that extruded front. And we're going to want to scale it in a little bit. So here we go. Now we're defining the basically width of our tire. And the next move we want to look at is sort of this little edge that dips in a little bit. So we want to kind of extrude a little bit of a scale and a little bit of a pushback at the same time. So let's make another poly extrude. Again, remember, since we just used that tool, all we have to do is tap Q on the keyboard. That automatically lays down a new poly extrude for us. So we want to push this in just a little bit. And I'm going to go ahead and scale it in just a hair as well. Okay. Awesome. And now what we want to do is punch a hole through so that we've got this little divot here, right? And on the back side, we've got sort of a same little divot, and we've got this connection in between. So we've got like a donut shape. Well, to make that donut shape, we're going to basically remove these two interfaces and then build a bridge between them. Let's go ahead and just remove those faces for right now. So I'm going to select the one face here, tumble around and make sure the other one is selected, and just tap Delete on the keyboard. As soon as I do, I get that hole. Those interfaces have been deleted, and look over in my network view, I've been given this new node called a blast node. And the blast node tells me that basically I just removed certain primitives. Remember, those also could be called faces in other applications you may have used. So we've removed those primitives here, and the primitives we removed were number 48 and number 49. Now, very simply, to use the poly bridge tool to make this gap, we can invoke it from the shelf if we like. There's a shelf tool for poly bridge. So we'll just click poly bridge, and let's read our instructions here. So we want to select the bridge source polygons or edges and press enter. Now, what I want to do is grab this edge around here and this edge around here. So let's go ahead and select those edges. So let's turn over to edge select mode. Hold down A on the keyboard and middle click. As we know, that'll select the whole loop. So that's my source polygon. I'll hit enter, or I'm sorry, source edges, and I'll hit enter. And now my tooltip here down here tells me that I need to select the destination edges. Well, the destination for that bridge will be the other side, so it'll be this set here. So I'll hold down A on the keyboard and middle click, and that'll allow me to select again all those edges, that loop of edges. And now my instructions tell me that I need to press enter to complete. Pressing enter lets Houdini generate the geometry needed to fill in that gap. Now there's a lot of options in this new Poly Bridge tool, and we'll look at those in the beginning of the next lesson.